My name's Eric Fung. I work at Shopify. It's a company that helps people sell things online. Today I want to talk to you about how I use Firebase notifications and cloud messaging in an app that I made recently. So let's get started. This is the name of the app. It's called Entrepreneur's Digest. I joined a team recently that is called Growth Marketing. They didn't have any mobile developers, and they're very interested in pursuing mobile apps as a growth strategy. We wanted to make apps and then compare them against our web properties in terms of user acquisition, engagement, and retention. That's what the app looks like. It's basically a RSS reader. It's a blog article reader. We make original content aimed at entrepreneurs. About a third of our views come from mobile right now. And so the native app has features you would expect, be able to browse all the articles, filter them, and have a full screen reading experience. And then, of course, you would get notifications when we have new articles, typically 1 or 2 a day. As I was the sole mobile developer on it, it was a great chance for me to just explore new technologies, and what I chose was to look at Firebase. I'm sure you've heard of it already. Show of hands, who has touched something in Firebase already? Okay, a couple people. Anybody do anything besides a real-time database, like any of the other technologies? Cool. It's a unified app platform that Google is pushing really hard right now for both iOS, Android, and mobile web. There's 15 of these different features, all under this Firebase umbrella now. For my blog app, I knew I needed notifications, cloud messaging, but if you look, there is 2 things labeled notifications and cloud messaging. If you're familiar with GCM and its precursor, C2DM, you've probably familiar with cloud messaging, but what's notifications? Is it an evil twin? Is it 2 sides of the same coin? Let's have a look a little closer. So cloud messaging, as it turns out, is just the old GCM with a new Firebase name. It lets you do reliable delivery of push messages to devices. It is its own server, but you can integrate your server with it to send messages. And it has client SDKs for iOS, Android, and I want to say a third JavaScript. I'm not sure, but also for mobile web. On the other hand, notifications is a brand new tool. It's a growth tool aimed at people who aren't developers. So you can use this nice graphical console to send messages for re-engagement. So re-engagement is when people have already installed your app, but you want them to come back and use it more. Anybody is able to use this. It doesn't require any coding at all. You fill out a bunch of fields on the form, and you're good to go. What's also nice about it is that you get built-in analytics after you send those notifications out. That's a great feature. So turning to how you would implement on Android, this is your dependency line. It's as easy as that, whether you're using the notifications or directly with cloud messaging. And when I say this is it, I really mean that. There's one line you add to your build.gradle dependency, and you're going to get a lot of stuff. What do you get? Manifest permissions. So if you've used GCM before, you know you have to make sure you have the right signature permissions so that other apps can't send you notifications. You get the handling of that registration token, so your server can send directly to your device if you want. You know that gets rotated every so often, so it handles all the retry for you. You get your broadcast receiver registered, which is what actually receives the message from the FCM servers. You get automatic display of notifications when your app is in the background, so all that business of parsing the notification and then creating a notification up in the tray, that's done for you. You get topic subscription. So this is what was called PubSub before, where you could subscribe to, say, like all sports scores for this team or all topics of news related to weather. And the last thing you get, as I said before, is analytics being recorded for you. Looking at the new notifications console, you see this is what the web form looks like. You have this area here. Oh, is there a laser? Maybe. I don't want to hit the wrong button. There's an area where you can put your message text, a title. It's a bit fuzzy here. There's a delivery date, which is a cool feature where you can say, don't send this message until 8 a.m. tomorrow. And optionally, in your recipient's time zone, so you don't wake them up in the middle of the night for something they're not interested in. You can also send to specific segments of your users, so all people that have a certain version of your app, all people with a certain language on your phone, or all people in a certain country. And there's some other advanced stuff to configure, things like expiry and priority. And after you've created a notification and you hit send on the bottom of the form there, the console keeps track of it, and you can do funnel analysis. So this is where you see how many devices you sent the message to, and then how many people opened that notification. So the whole goal is for people not to swipe it away, is to go back into your app when they get that notification. This is just a sample I was playing around with, so there's only one event. You can optionally define another conversion event also. Now the client is the one generating these analytics events, and it sends it back up to the server. So you might think, this is amazing. That one line of my dependency got me all of this. And if that's all you need is to be able to send a simple message to your users to remind them to today is a special holiday, go into the app for a deal or something, everything out of the box is going to be great for you. However, what if you want something different about the way that notification is displayed? Because you didn't have to do any code to create it, we should think about, is there a way that I can customize that styling of that notification? What if you need to control how, not only the visual appearance, but when you send multiple notifications, by default you're just going to get a new notification for each one you send in your tray. What if you want to group and summarize them? What if instead of having that notification displayed, you want to do something else before it's displayed, or even have the flexibility to say, I don't want it to be displayed right now, but later. And lastly, if I can achieve all this customization, what will happen to my analytics and reporting? So on the few slides ago, I showed the console had a few customization options about privacy, or sorry, not privacy, priority and sound, but it doesn't give you that much customization, and not most of these things that I've described here. So in order to understand what's going on and what we can do, we have to dig a little bit deeper. The short answer is it's possible to do almost everything I've said, but we have to do a bit of work. So let's have a bit closer look at the coordination, the orchestration between what the client library is doing and what notifications console is doing. The important key thing to understand is that there's two kinds of messages that can be sent in FCM. Here's a JSON payload of what's called a notification message is called. It's identified by the presence of a key labeled notification. This notification object has a predefined set of keys. So body and title are two of them, and they map directly. The title maps directly to the bolded line in your default notification style, and the body is the message. These are displayed on your app's behalf with the default library that you're getting if they're received in the background. If your app's in the foreground, the user's already using it, you get a different callback. Now, a console, the console can only send, skip ahead here. The console can only send notification messages. That's because on the console, there was a mandatory field to fill in the message text, and that's mapped right to the body key, the body value of a notification object. So from the console, you can only send a notification message. Now, a data message, instead of having notification in the object, you have a data key. And inside that data object, it's completely free-form. You can have whatever key values that you want. And this type of message, when it's received by the device, nothing happens for you except the receiver just calls the callback and says, here's a message that we got. So you have to take care of everything. The console cannot send this kind of message. Now, if you have played around with the console, you scroll down far enough, there is a spot where you can add custom values, and you can fill those in, and they'll be sent as a data key, but it still forces you to type a message in, which gets sent in a notification object. This is important to understand because here's a summary of what's happening when you send either kind of message, either a notification message or a data message, and what happens when your app is in the foreground or background. If you look at this, it's outline very clearly what happens, but from looking a lot at the forum posts and Stack Overflow questions, this seems to be a big source of confusion for a lot of developers. Even though GCM was the service that introduced this distinction between data and notification messages. So it's clear that if you want to have full control over how your notifications are created and when, you need to be sending data messages because nothing is happening for you by default. You just get a callback and your notifications aren't being created for you. So, okay, my next step was to start sending data messages. Now recall we can't use a notification console for this, so we'll have to go back to programmatically sending it. And then we know that we're going to get that callback in the client called onMessageReceived. And when we get that, we're going to create a new notification, and then we'll call our notification manager to post it. However, when I started to use data notifications, I quickly discovered something, that I didn't get any analytics anymore. And also no funnel analysis. And that's kind of a problem because I want to know if my notifications are actually having their goal of re-engaging the users. So then I thought, is it possible to get the best of both worlds? I want to be able to have full control over how my notifications are created, when they're created, and use all the flexibility and the power of FCM. But I also wanted those analytics and the funnel analysis that I was getting from Notifications Console. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about what I did, what I was not able to do, and maybe somebody in the audience, as this talk filters out, maybe somebody has come up with a better way, or maybe it'll spur Google to work on improving it. And okay, let's first look at styling and grouping notifications. So remember that when we get that onMessageReceived callback, we have nothing. We just have our message. There's no notification object being created for us, even a template. We have to go out and call the builder and create our notification. If you've ever worked with any notifications before, you're probably familiar with the builder. There's a ton of methods on it to set the icon, to set the text, to set the summary text, all kinds of things. Some styling that you might want to do right away is on, I think, Lollipop and Hired, they have this accent color, which you can use to tint the circle, and then your sort of flattened app icon is what's used there. The first thing we want to do is to be able to group notifications. Why? This is purely a not annoy the user type of thing. If you are Gmail and you receive a lot of messages and you have multiple accounts, you could easily clutter, a whole bunch of icons in your notification tray that are, tedious to have to swipe or to process. So the best practice is to group them when you have multiple related ones. And after you group them, you want to create a summary that just indicates this is all the ones that have been collapsed together. So to do that, it's quite easy. You have your builder, and you define a string, which is just the group name, and you call setGroup. So I have one notification here that I've built. I call setGroup on it. Another notification comes in. I call setGroup with the same group, and that indicates to Android that these are related. So I'm using a single group key here because my app only has one kind of notification. If you have multiple kinds, you would use different group keys for notifications that you know are related. To create that summary, remember again, a summary should represent all the notifications that have been grouped together with an appropriate title. So you're keeping track somewhere that you've collapsed or combined n notifications together. So your title might now say n new articles. You set the same group so that Android can associate this summary with those group messages. And there's a flag that you call here called setGroupSummary. Now you post the individual notifications and you post this summary, and Android will just do the right thing. So the nice thing about using notification compat is that we'll automatically get the right behavior on the right device that the user is using. So on a Wear device, grouped notifications actually show up in what are called stacked notifications. So when the user gets them, they're stacked like this. So you see a bit of a card, and there's another one that says one more. And when you tap, the user actually gets to see and skim the individual notifications. This is what happens when you call setGroup. And then Android decides not to show the summary on Wear because it's at a glance, you can't see as much. And then on NuGet, notifications have changed quite a bit. Not only has their style changed out of the box, but now group notifications are displayed in a bundle that is either collapsed, and the bundle is generated automatically for you, and it pulls information from each individual notification. And then when the user swipes to expand it, you actually can interact with each notification individually inside there, but it can be collapsed. So by using the compat builder, you're getting all this behavior for free, and you don't have to replicate it on each device. The next thing I want to talk about is the idea of notifications as not something to display, as sort of a signal to do something. Sometimes you do need to control when you display the notification to the user. What's one reason to do that? Maybe you have some kind of do not disturb setting in your app. The user says, I don't want to get any notifications between 10 p.m. my time and 6 a.m. the next morning. And perhaps you don't want to deal with that server logic, or the user has other kinds of logic about when they want to see notifications, and you want to suppress it. And just remember that you need to show it at a later time. You might also not have all the information from that push message to display to the user. Perhaps you need to read something from the client application, or you need to do more processing of that message or some filtering. So you might not want to show it in that case too. The last one, which is the useful case to me, is what the documentation calls send to sync messages. These are a signal to the app that there is new data on the server, and then it should do a fetch of that data. When we do that sync, when the server says that there is new data, you want to be a good app citizen. If you think about a push message, the Firebase statistics that Google likes to tout is that they're delivering tens of billions of messages a day, 95% of them under a quarter of a second. And in practice, I've noticed that when I'm testing too. If the device is online and the network is up, you'll get those right away. But what happens when all of your app instances get the notification together and they decide all to sync with your server? Your server's not going to have a good time. You don't want to inadvertently DOS your own server. So you might want to stagger the start time of that so that they all don't. You can kind of spread out the load on your own servers. And you don't want to sync when the device is perhaps in doze or is in sleeping, or the user's not plugged it into a charger. So all these things you want to consider when you are syncing with your server. If the message isn't urgent, you don't need to necessarily do it right away. That totally depends on your context. Now, there's a lot of resources about how to do background sync. If you attended Mark Murphy's talk yesterday, he did a thorough overview of doing periodic work. Google actually has a nice article that compares all the different techniques, Alarm Manager, async task, and a couple of things that I'm going to talk about. Since API 21, we have something called Job Scheduler now. Job Scheduler lets you define properties of your job to say, like, it needs network, or I'm okay with it syncing a half hour from now. But that's API 21 and up. So if you need to support older devices, you'll need to use something like Job Dispatcher. So this was announced at I/O this year. The source code of it has been released, and that training guide says you should consider in new applications to use Job Dispatcher. But I put a question mark here because while the source code is available, most of us are used to installing libraries by just putting that dependency line and trust that it's in some Maven artifact repository somewhere. But this isn't. The installation instructions for Job Dispatcher now say, check this code out, compile it, take that AAR, link it into your app. So for that reason, I don't want to deal with that maintenance. They don't have a lot of documentation about it. They just say, look at the source. That's not what I went with. The last one, which you may have heard about, is GCM Network Manager. This is a wrapper around Job Scheduler, but it does require Play services. So as long as your audience or your users are using the Play Store and not like on the Amazon App Store or one of the countries that doesn't use Play Store, you're good to go. Job Dispatcher, the way it's implemented, it also has it uses Play services as one of the pluggable drivers in it, and there's no other examples. But the idea with Job Dispatcher is that you could plug in a different implementation. So for the rest of this, I'm going to talk about GCM Network Manager. Now, jobs in GCM Network Manager are things that you just want to perform at some point in the future. And the way that it can be intelligent about the jobs is that when you define your job or your task, you specify what network requirements you need, if any, what your scheduling requirements are. So if this is important and you need it to run as soon as possible, you could define your job to execute within 30 seconds of receiving the message. Or if it's something that's not urgent and you want to allow the device to sleep as long as possible, you could say 4 hours is my maximum window. Once the scheduler has all this information about each of the jobs, it can then try to batch tasks from different apps together or different processes or different parts of your app together and defer it as long as possible. So if you say that you need a network connection and that you need it to be Wi-Fi, it will wait until Wi-Fi is available. If you say that you don't need it to be exact, it will wait until some other requests have come in and try to just batch them all together and then wake the radio up and send them all out. So I'm going to quickly go through a little bit of code that shows how you set up the jobs in Network Manager and how to set up that send to sync from the Firebase messaging service. So to get started, you need to include a library. It's as easy as just this one line. Notice that it's actually GCM in the artifact name. That's just how it's packaged. It's completely safe to use this with FCM. In your manifest, you're going to need to define a service that will be called when a notification comes in. So you just subclass from the built-in Firebase messaging service, and this is just all boilerplate on the intent filter. In the Firebase messaging service implementation, you're going to override message received. This is the actual data message that you've sent, and you can parse it out. Calling get data, you get a map back of those arbitrary key values that you put in. And as an example here, I pulled out some kind of article ID that I'm sending a notification for. Now, because you might not be posting this notification right away, I've left sort of this comment here that you're going to need to do something to remember later that you need to post this notification. So whether you persist this or you do something, keep it in memory. And what I want to do here is to say I'm going to schedule a sync with my server. And I just have this helper method, which you'll see on the next slide. And the way that I stagger that start time is that I just call, the random class has this next int, passing it my minimum sync time. So if my minimum sync time was 300 seconds, so 15 minutes from now, this will be anywhere from 1 second to 300 seconds from now as to when to, that's the earliest I want my sync to start. And then the max could be, I don't know, half an hour, whatever it is for your application. The schedule article fetch method creates a one-off task because I just want this to run once. The other kind is a periodic task and is more suitable for things that have to recur on a regular interval. I set the target, the service target of this to my sync background service, which we haven't seen yet. And I say that I need the network because I'm going to do a sync with my server. And the set execution window is where I pass in those min and max times. That's the minimum time I want to wait before my job should start, and the maximum I'm willing to wait. Once that task is built, you pass it off to the network manager and you schedule it. In that, the sync background service, sorry, not sync background service, that's a typo actually in that slide. I should fix that. This GCM task service is what the network scheduler is going to call to wake you up and say, your job is ready to run. And so this also is all boilerplate. You declare the name of your GCM task service. You pass in all these permissions and intent filter stuff. And then in its body, you're going to override the onRun task method. And you pluck out any extra data that you set. You can actually pass a bundle when you're creating your task. You pluck that out, and then you call your API service. So with whatever, you might be passing in an extra that says, this is the most recent article that I've already got. and then you would pass it here into your API to get and persist whatever your data is. Hand waving here, I've left in a to-do for you, or that at this point, once you know your sync has been successful, you would remember that previously you received that notification for some article that you need to now create. Maybe you're using an event bus or something like that to communicate this information around, or perhaps another service to wake up. So now I've just walked quickly through how you would use GCM Network Manager to help you implement a send to sync, how to defer the posting of those notifications. I'm going to come back and talk about analytics. So to look at the analytics that might be useful to capture, why not look at what Firebase was capturing for you when you were using all of its default behavior? That's all documented, what is being collected. So there's 4 events related to notifications. 2 are about when the notification is received, whether you got it in the foreground or the background. And the other 2 are the action the user took on that notification, whether you swiped it away, that's dismiss, or whether they tapped on it to open it. So these event names, unfortunately, are reserved. So we can't just create events with the same names as these ones. So we're going to have to use our own names. So let's look at the first 2 about receiving the notification, foreground and receive, and see how we would implement that. Fortunately, other smarter people than me have figured out the best ways to detect whether your app is in the foreground or background. Mark Murphy has a good article using something that's not well known called ordered broadcast. It's really old, but it's a good way to implement foreground or background detection. There's another way that Philippe Bro has come up with that uses the application subclass and activity lifecycle callbacks that involves hooking into key methods like on trim memory and on resume, and also detecting the special case when a phone call comes in or no, your screen goes to sleep, I think. But there's a whole article about that. So I've chosen his technique, which gets me a variable in my application class, and I've just exposed a method to say, is my app in the foreground or the background? Once you have that detection in place, the line or the spot in your code to insert this analytics event would be in that Firebase messaging service class. So this is, again, when it's called when your push notification arrives. This is the service that's woken up. And in it, you would just log the event, whether you receive the notif in the foreground or background, depending on this Boolean that you would get from your application. So now we've taken care of those 2 events. Another sort of housekeeping detail that you might want is that message, the push notification that you receive, might have extra data in it. For example, the article ID. And that's something you might want to record as part of the analytics event. So I've not put it here, but there's a params argument that's just a bundle of extra parameters that you put when you log your event. As for the event when the user taps on a notification to open it, this is a lot of code, but it's mostly from any sort of tutorial about notifications. The key things to note here are that I'm using an intent service as called notification action service with an action called tapped. And that's what I'm passing into this pending intent that is set in the content intent of the notification builder. Basically, it's saying when the notification is tapped, this intent will get fired, and that will send a signal to my notification action service that was tapped, and it will pass any data, additional data that you set on here. For simplicity, I've defined, I'm using the same action service to handle both the tapped case and the swiped to dismiss case. All that you would change is you would change the action, and you would change, instead of setting it on the content intent in the notification builder, you would set it on the delete intent. That's the builder method that you call to say what happens when your notification is swiped away. So here's the sort of skeleton outline of notification action service. when that's woken up, onHandle intent is called, and you just switch on the action to say, if it's tapped, we're going to log the event that the notification was opened. Otherwise, if it was dismissed, it's dismissed. In here, again, there would be intent extras if you've declared them to say this is the item ID, and you would pass them in the params of the analytics. I realize this is a lot of code. I've created a small little gist that contains these little code snippets, and I'm happy to talk to you more about a more complete implementation. I'll also have extra resources at the end where Google demonstrates a lot, some of these techniques too. So we're recording all 4 of these analytics events now. What we want to be able to do is still do that funnel analysis. Now, there's a couple limitations if you've played with anything to do with Firebase analytics in the console. You can't filter events by their parameters. So what I mean is, if you are browsing the analytics console, you can see the number of times that notifications were received or tapped open. But any data that I recorded along with that, like this item ID, I can't filter it. Another example, there's search in this app that I built. I record the keyword that the user was searching for is that. What are the top 5 most common terms that people are searching for? You can't see that in the Firebase console. It's not that they're not recorded, but the console doesn't give you a way to pluck that data out. Oh, I see a hand at the back.
So, can you just listen to those events, like Google Analytics or something else, and then do that filtering there?
Yeah, so the point was that you could just also call Google Analytics and be able to drill that. Yes, so there's actually a guide about how to use Google Analytics and Firebase in parallel, or forwarding all the events. So yeah, you could do it that way. In order to be able to do a per notification funnel analysis, though, I need to be able to get at that item ID. It's not, it's one data point to be able to say, of all the notifications I've ever sent, how many have been open. But I would like to see, on an individual basis, did more people tap on this notification than another one? And for that, I need to be able to filter those events by the one of the parameters that I set on it. The only place in the analytics console that you can specify a parameter is in audiences. So let's have a look at what an audience is. An audience is a way to segment your user base. So there's a bunch of audiences defined for you automatically, like users who have ever paid for an in-app purchase, users that have this version of the app, users from a particular country or have a language on their phone. The filters in analytics, you can only, even though they're limited by the events you can filter on, you can only filter by one of those at a time. Audiences not only let you filter on multiple events, but you're allowed to have Boolean conditions. And the important point for us is that you can define one of your custom parameters. So audiences is a tab in the analytics console that you can define. For our particular use case, we want to segment our audience, or define an audience, by the item ID. So this is too blurry for the people at the back. But I've defined an audience that says users who received a notification with a specific ID and that have created the notification open for that same ID, or they've dismissed it. So that should capture both the users so that should capture all users that get the notification, and it should capture all users because the only 2 actions you can take, or the only 2 events that you can generate after a receive event is open or dismiss. That's the theory anyway. So again, that's a summary of what this audience is trying to define. So it's a basic Boolean expression to try to capture all users who have received that notification.
So if the user turns off their phone anytime and doesn't interact with the notification, would that classify it as dismiss, or would it kind of be left hanging?
It's still there. The notification survives your phone going to sleep.
Okay. Oh no, if it reboots, say if their phone died.
Good question.
Oh, I know that's a weird case.
I don't actually know. Do you get?
I think it's Notification Manager
Okay, so the answer on the back was that it will repost it when the device comes back on. Now we have an audience defined for all those users that have received that particular notification about that article. We want to define a funnel. So a funnel is just a sequence of events that happen sequentially. This one is just a very simple one called open notification. It just means that I want to track users who have received, or who've created this receive notification, who've generated this receive notification event, followed by an open event. So this helps me track my open ratio. Once you define this funnel, then you can view it filtered by that audience. And ta-da, this is what you get. So this is where you specify the audience, and here it shows you the count of events, and you can see it's hard to see here. It's like 25% of the 272 messages that were sent were actually opened. Now I'm still unsure whether this is providing me with accurate results. The problem is that earlier, when I was playing with this a couple weeks ago, these bars were reversed. So there would be 10 events that were the notification received, but like 80 notification opens, which doesn't make any sense because each notification event, even if a user has multiple devices, each open goes with each receive. So there should never be more opens than receives. Now, it could be that the data is a bit laggy. Analytics is typically, I think they're down to something like 4 hours now. It used to be 24 hours where the data lags. Or it could be just something in my funnel definition or my audience definition. And you can kind of see it here. The bars are just sort of a thumbnail of what the user funnel looks like. The number of users that received the notification received is much smaller than the number who have actually opened it, which doesn't make any sense to me. So it's something I need to dig into. Oh, question on the back. So the way my notifications are set up, they're dismissed as soon as you tap on them. So it shouldn't be possible to tap on it more than once. Yeah. So I need to first, I'll talk about how I'm going to dig into this a little bit before I reach out to the Firebase support. One thing to note about funnels, if you've used another tool like Mixpanel, is that Firebase funnels are open, which means this event will show up in the funnel even if the user has not, the precursor event hasn't happened. So you need to ensure that your events in your funnel are logically related. So there should be no way that this event is generated without this event happening first. Okay, at this point, you're happy with your Google Analytics, and you're like, ugh, let's just abandon ship. It's too much work to do what I already had in Google Analytics. But I'm kind of hedging or betting on Firebase. One reason is that I really like the level of integration. So all those different tools, and I've been playing with remote config and dynamic links, they all tie together with Firebase Analytics. It's really nice that way. The one big feature about filtering on parameters is something that in my emails with Firebase support, they say it's a very highly requested feature. For a lot of people, doing analytics without being able to query on those parameters is pretty useless. Another option is for you to take all these raw events with their parameters and stream them into BigQuery. So BigQuery is Google's cloud scale SQL query tool. So I just started using this last week. It's a little button that you push at the bottom of the analytics console. It does require a paid Firebase plan. So everything I've talked about, the analytics and cloud messaging, all that is free for basically any scale. But BigQuery, because it has all your table data in the cloud, you need to pay. However, even with a paid plan, a pay-as-you-go plan, you get a terabyte free a month. So it's pretty generous. And I've looked at my data. I have a few thousand users now. It's maybe a megabyte a day. So I think I'm good for now anyway. Another caveat about BigQuery is that your historical raw events aren't migrated into BigQuery. So if you are interested in playing with the raw data, you should set that up early because the data is only streamed into BigQuery the moment after you've already turned it on. The final thing that I want to talk about is that I've kind of glossed over so far is that we're no longer using the console to send the messages, but we still need to send those messages to the user. How do we do that? I mentioned earlier that for cloud messaging, you don't always have to have an application server. And in my case, for various technical reasons, I'm not a Rails backend developer, and we have our own CMS, all this stuff. It wasn't easy to integrate sort of that backend communication. So what do? First of all, if you don't need to send messages to individual users, you don't need to collect those. So if you've used GCM before, you know that the first thing you do with a registration token, once the client gets it from Google, is to send it to your app server so that your server has a way to send you the push message. Instead, you can use topic messaging. So this is just a pub-sub model. The client app declares that it is interested in subscribing to a particular topic. It's just an alphanumeric string, and it's as easy as calling in the Firebase class subscribe to topic. And in my particular use case, all instances of the app just subscribe to this topic. And so when I send messages, I don't send them to individual devices, I send them to this topic. Firebase takes care of sending to all those. So I don't have to deal with that registration token at all. And then to actually send the message, I was saying before I didn't need to integrate it into my backend. You can just do it with anything that can send an HTTP request, because it's just a HTTP protocol with JSON body payloads. In the gist that I alluded to earlier, I have an example using curl. It's just a simple bash script that you can do. You take the server key that you get from the console, put it in the script, and you're good to go. It's also really useful for debugging, because you don't have to you can send to individual devices when you're debugging. You just need to record that registration token. You can even just dump it to Logcat, cut and paste it, and then just send testing to one device individually. So a couple slides with resources. While I was learning about all the stuff on Firebase, these two GitHub projects were very useful. There's a Quick Start Android that shows all kinds of sample SDK integrations for Android, and there is a specific project called Android Active Notifications that has examples of how to create summaries, how to create grouping of notifications, and best practices for how to update those. The Firebase team has been publishing a lot of videos on YouTube, and they also post regularly to their own blog. Excuse me. And when you run into trouble, their Firebase support link has pointers to Stack Overflow with the appropriate tags to use. There's a mailing list, a Google group, where there's a lot of Firebase advocates and engineers hanging out. And if you really think you found a bug or you really want a feature, I encourage all of you to report that you want parameters in analytics. I've sent 3 or 4 messages to that team, and I've gotten responses pretty quickly. Even only it's a personal thing to say, yes, we've acknowledged this is a problem, or we're working on it. This is something you should bookmark if you're working with Firebase. Occasionally, stuff goes wrong, and this has sort of a 7-day window to show you if any of those services are down on an individual feature basis. So if it's cloud messaging that's down, or remote config that's down, or analytics that are down. And this is not Google or Firebase maintained, but the Firebase developers using Firebase have put together a Slack. There's over 1,000 people there, and it may or may not be useful for you. I haven't found it that useful, personally. It's just a lot of people asking questions and not a lot of answers at the moment, but hopefully that'll change. So in summary, Firebase notifications, that console gives you a very basic implementation, and if that's suitable for you, integration is it's simple. But for anything more complex, you're going to have to use FCM. So if you're hoping that the migration from GCM to FCM was going to be a cakewalk, it's not. For me, this didn't reduce the amount of code I had to write. So I've implemented C2DM and GCM in the past. It's about the same amount of work, plus a little bit more because I needed the analytics. Yeah. That's all for me. These are a whole bunch of links. I got to social media kind of late, which is why all my user IDs aren't all the same. But I can be reached here. As soon as I get back and sit down, I'll publish the slides if you want to have a closer look or review it. But thank you very much. Let's have some questions.
So what does Firebase, can you compare Firebase Analytics versus Google Analytics?
Question was to compare Firebase and Google Analytics.
Is there one that can get from one and not the other, or is it basically comparable?
So Google Analytics has, I think, a much longer history. I'm not strong on the data side of things. Firebase Analytics is meant to be the platform for mobile analytics. There are a lot of things designed around mobile conversion events that they help you record. Whereas Google Analytics, to apply it to Android, there's a bunch of stuff that you needed to do manually, like tracking activity sessions, when the user was actually using your app. But when you integrate Firebase Analytics, it's as easy as just putting one dependency line, and they automatically track your session and engagement. So it is designed from the ground up to be for mobile. Now, Google Analytics on the back end has much more powerful reporting and filtering features. So we're kind of stuck in this place where it's a little bit simpler to integrate on mobile with Firebase, but the reporting and the filtering isn't as strong. Whereas Google Analytics, you can get all that filtering and reporting on the back end, but the client integration is a little bit more work. So I don't want to say much more than that because I am not an expert on GA either. Not that I know. The question was whether you can export to other things other than BigQuery. Not that I know.
Is Firebase strictly Android?
Question was whether Firebase is for Android. No, they have client SDKs for iOS, Android, and mobile web. I think, mobile web or like Chrome, because you can deliver notifications to Chrome now too.
What's your feeling on the momentum behind Firebase? Is it likely to continue growing, or do you see it, because if it goes away, you're in trouble?
Sure. Momentum behind Firebase. They seem to be putting a lot of effort into it, and there seems to be a lot of progress being made on Firebase.
User base, you see, like when you go to the website, you see the user base is pretty big right now?
I think a lot of people are using the real-time database aspect of Firebase because that's been around much longer. So all these other things under the Firebase umbrella were only announced at I/O this year, so it's only been less than 6 months or so. Hard to.
Firebase has been around for how, 4 or 5 years, right?
Google acquired them about 18 months ago, but I think they existed before that, strictly doing that real-time database syncing aspect of it. It's hard to say. I've given this talk in Toronto at a meetup too, and there weren't a lot of people that had integrated the other aspects of Firebase. It's hard to say. Maybe you can get some more information out of some of there's Frank and Martin, I think, are Firebase people from Google here today. So, but I don't know. Personally, I haven't spoken with many people that have been using it. So. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.